finding the fluidity of posture and movement in our day. It really begins with the feet because that's the only contact point between the body and the ground. And if you look even more specifically, it's really the skin. The skin in the bottom of the feet is really that connection.
Well, I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Emily Splichal to the Core Connections podcast today. You guys, this is going to be such an amazing conversation. I already know, and you're gonna find out why here very quickly. So, Dr. Emily, I want to start off with having you introduce and tell us a little bit about you. What got you interested in wanting to study the feet and become a podiatrist? Because that is a very specialized, medical position.
It is, and thank you for having me on the show. So it's important for people to understand that I may be a podiatrist, but I consider myself more of a functional podiatrist. And even more so than that, I actually think of myself more as a human movement specialist. So I love movement. I believe that I treat movement. Feet happen to be this conduit to movement, or it's this critical part of how we move and maintain our posture. And then my approach within podiatry is very integrated, functional. The functional means that I'm thinking about stress levels, sleep, inflammation. Obviously, functional movement is part of that, but I try to take this holistic approach. I got into podiatry not because I really wanted to specialize in feet, but more so that I was in the fitness industry and I was living in New York City, being a trainer, working, teaching group exercise. And then I wanted to get into graduate school, but I really wanted to be able to stay within the fitness industry because it was my connection to movement and athletics. I think movement is beautiful. And the only way that I could do that and stay in fitness and stay in New York City, that was a key part of it, is that I had to do podiatry because there's a podiatry school in Harlem in New York City. And then just by chance or by my curiosity, I have no idea, is I was able to bring that medical specialty into my passion for movement and fitness and performance. And an important part of that is when I was going through residency, to be a surgeon, which is part of podiatry in the United States, is you have to become a surgeon, is I left residency, went back to school, got my master's in human movement, and that really was the connector between this fitness that I was doing, my medical degree, and then the bridge is my master's in human movement. So it just started to shape a very unique approach, which then as soon as I got licensed and finished residency, I was able to really define what I wanted to do with my career ultimately.
I love that. I love hearing that you were the functional side because I think that is the missing piece in medicine. I'm sure we could have a whole conversation about that. Because I've worked with clients that have had to go to podiatrists and things like that. And they're so focused on just the feet that we miss everything else. And it's like the feet are not a standalone piece of the body. They are a part of the body. They play a role. We need to address them, but we can't just single them out and be like, it's your feet's fault. So we have to look at the whole chain. And when I saw that you were doing a workshop on feet, pelvic floor, and fascia. And I was like, whoa, this woman is speaking my language. We have to connect. We have to talk about this because there are not a lot of people that really understand the feet. And my background being in Pilates, going down this deep route of pelvic floor, fascia, all of that. It is phenomenal to me time and time again, the amazing results we can get for men as well, but I tend to speak more to women, especially in the online space. And pelvic floor health just doesn't get enough of a conversation. So anyway, back to where we're going to talk about today. So Dr. Emily, I know we want to get in and I'm really excited to have you talk about hormone changes and the shifting that takes place from pregnancy into postpartum and how that can affect our gait, how we walk, how we're moving, postural changes, and all of that. Because I see it all the time. I'm constantly working, teaching moms postpartum in particular, how to move better, how to reconnect with their body. That we've been through all these changes, whether it's been 1 pregnancy, 5 pregnancies, so on. And it can leave you feeling a lot of pain, a lot of dysfunction, pelvic floor issues, and so on. And so Dr. Emily, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah. So one kind of on that, as you're speaking, what it makes me think about is emphasizing or just bringing to the forefront that our foot posture really sets the tone for the rest of our body alignment. So just that skeletal foundation, and that is looking at the foot really from a mechanical perspective. That's not the only way that I look at the human foot. I look at the foot from a fascial perspective, from a sensorially powerful connection that it has with the brain and with the nervous system. But if we initially look at it mechanically and as our foot posture, yes, any change in our foot posture will affect, here we're talking more skeletal or pelvis, the pelvis alignment, the pelvis stability, pelvic floor, deep hip, glutes, all of that is influenced by skeletal alignment. What happens as we go through different changes, hormonal changes, whether that's pregnancy related hormone changes or midlife hormone changes, is it affects our connective tissue. And it's important to note that our foot has over 100 ligaments, obviously lots of muscles and tendons as well, but all of those different ligaments play a very important role in maintaining our foot posture. So if we have an increase in relaxin during pregnancy so that our pelvis can widen and we can give birth, that same hormone is affecting those 100 ligaments, which can allow foot shape changes during pregnancy. And that's something important to appreciate. And then midlife, as we are having different hormone shifts, levels of estrogen, etc., that affects the connective tissue integrity as well. And that can also lead to foot posture changes, especially unilateral, meaning one side. So if we start to get one side of our foot shape and posture that changes, it's going to affect our leg length and then our pelvis alignment. And it can lead to a lot of pelvic obliquity, which means just one side of the pelvis is rotating, which we know affects the pelvic floor. So I just want to kind of start with that and see if there's kind of some thoughts that extrapolate from that foot posture to total body posture influence.
Well, I feel like I'm going to have some of my moms listening be like, yes, my feet got bigger, right? That's a common thing. It doesn't happen to all women. It didn't happen to me, but I have heard that from some clients where their feet get bigger during pregnancy, which obviously makes sense. It's going to affect our gait. Also, so speaking like pelvic floor function, but also SI, and that's what we work with so many moms. They've got that SI pain, what's going on with their pelvis because their pelvis is shifting and twisting that SI joint. I tend to focus a little bit more on the pelvis than the foot. Again, I think they're equally important, but because we're always trying to like rebalance that pelvis and getting them to do movements on a daily basis to keep that pelvis as aligned as possible. So that's why I'm excited for this deeper foot conversation. So when you see as far as like gait goes, and one of the things I see, I don't know if you want to speak to this a little bit too, is how women really tend to pull into their back. And do you see a specific relation in that to the foot, or is that more, I mean, it's all connected, right? You can't say it's one thing in particular, but it's like the foot affects the pelvis, which affects the back.
Yes. So I find that if we are not inherently stable, like deeply stable, our body is very intelligent and it will find a way to move. It will find a way to stand up vertically in gravity. And whether it is postpartum, it is a shift in our foot posture, it's a different injury because moms who get pregnant might have been former athletes and had certain movement patterns that were repetitive, that all of that just continues to follow us through life and through these different phases. So yes, when I look at a patient, I'm always looking to determine, is their compensation pattern, whether they're pulling into the back, as you're saying in this example, is that a bottom up reason or is that a top down reason? And then regardless of whether it's bottom up, top down, there are these core foundational techniques that I incorporate, which is very much based around getting the foot intrinsic muscles. So there's 26 muscles in the bottom of the foot, getting them to connect with and coordinate with the pelvic floor and with the diaphragm. And then finding how that coordination is actually very rhythmic and relaxed. So that's another thing that I try to communicate with my patients, is that this stability that we appreciate and that we're speaking about here is, I call it almost like a sinusoidal wave, or I try to tell people it's kind of like you're saying hello, like you're there, but you're still relaxed, like you're never super contracting into it, because then that has opposite deleterious effects. And then we start to get pudendal nerve entrapments if we're staying very specific in the pelvis, or you get hypertonic contractions, which is just as stressful to the body. So I always think of it as, what is that skeletal alignment? That's the mechanical side. Where's the breath and this fascial connection between our foot intrinsics, our pelvic floor, our diaphragm? And then what is your sense of awareness of that position? And that becomes the sensory. So oftentimes it could be that any of the listeners who are experiencing this, is that we have just found this disconnection from our body, and we need to recalibrate the perception that, do the listeners even feel their feet? Are they tuned into their feet? Do they know where their feet are every time their foot strikes the ground? Do they feel each digit? Same thing with the pelvis. Do you feel the subtlety of the pelvis? And then it works its way up. And then really you could put like a fourth one on there, which is kind of the emotional side and like the autonomic nervous system, which just plays into this whole thing as well. And that's really how we need to be looking holistically at any pattern that we're seeing, or any symptom that the listeners might be feeling.
So I want to touch back on something you said, and that is the hypertonic, like overactivating, because that is across the board. And I'm sure you see it too, especially with the female population. Women are too tight and too restricted in their pelvis, in their feet, we're just too tight. And so much of what I am working on, and so much of what you're doing in the technology you have created, which we're definitely going to talk about that, because I have been so excited about that. My clients love it, by the way. Like they just are like, oh my gosh, those little blue balls are so amazing.
Yes. I love it.
They absolutely love it. And so I'm always constantly working on getting my clients to relax into their body, right? When they're in a safe position, like close your eyes, like where is your breath going? What are you feeling in your body? And to the feet piece of it specifically, as people get older, and maybe, we could say maybe pregnancy is a little bit of it, maybe being a mom, holding kids and babies kind of into that back, it gets them, or there's so many factors here. We've been taught time and time again to like do squats and hang out in our heels all the time. So people have forgotten and or have not been taught how to use their feet and use their toes. And like I was someone, really quick story here. So when I was younger, because I had so much knee pain, they put me in shoes because I have really high arches. They put me in shoes like that. I had to wear, I had house shoes, like tennis shoes for my house. I was wearing shoes all the time because I want it with orthotics and you name it, right? To support my feet. Okay, fast forward, 40 years old. I love to be barefoot. That is my favorite thing in the world, is to be barefoot. Yeah. The only reason I wear tennis shoes when I'm teaching at the studio all day is because it's on concrete and my body does not like concrete. So what have I discovered in all these years? I look back and I'm like, and please speak to this too, but we don't use our toes and our feet enough. We just flat out don't even use them, is what I see. We have put way too much weight back into our heels. And we have to retrain the brain that we need to actually use our feet to walk. And it sounds so silly when I bring this up to people. I watch people walk all the time. I'm like, let's evaluate your walking. And they're like, walking? What? And I'm like, yeah, because you're not rotating and you're so stiff and you stop at the ball of your feet and you don't use your toes, right? All of those things really matter. And in the Pilates realm, and I would even say in all of our online stuff, right? I get people work out barefoot when you're in a place that's really safe. You're not lifting heavy weights or doing crazy stuff. So that tactile feedback and feeling of our feet, this is where I want you to go and talk more about like what is happening. Explain this to people, to our ladies, like why is it so important? Why is Erica over here always saying like, work out barefoot, what can be the issues with orthotics if you want to go there. I mean, again, there's a time and a place probably for them, but where can we go in, and why are these things important for not just our gait, but for our pelvic floor, for helping us to connect in our body, because we're all so disconnected, not purposely, it just is the world we live in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and that's very much my career focus, especially this phase of my career, is very much around helping people to connect. I do truly also believe that we are sensorially disconnected. We're disconnected from ourselves. Technology doesn't help, but we're just in a very disconnected emotionally, kind of a type A stressed, like that, right? And if you think of just emotional anxiety type of stress and the need to try to feel control, like that, to me, that's a very tightening thought or emotion or response within the body versus like, whoosh, like relax. Like when you're on vacation, you're kind of like, ugh, like you let it all go. But that's kind of how we need it. Now that starts with our feet, that whole letting go, connecting, really finding the fluidity of posture and movement in our day, et cetera, really begins with the feet, because that's the only contact point between the body and the ground. And if you look even more specifically, it's really the skin. The skin in the bottom of the feet is really that connection. There's thousands of nerves in the bottom of the feet. Those nerves are very specific. They are touch nerves. They happen to be the same nerves that are in our hands, and the way that we feel and touch and interact with our environment from a hand sensory perspective is very important to really the way that we control movement, fine motor, we interact with others, things like that. So our hands are very important. So are our feet. Now, if we are chronically in shoes, arch supports, orthotics, things like that, then we are not connecting to those nerves. Those nerves are not reading the ground. Our foot becomes very passive. It's not part of the conversation, the posture and the movement conversation. So getting out of shoes, getting onto surfaces that are sensory stimulating, harder surfaces, ironically, are actually more neurostimulating than soft surfaces. So that's where I would like to get people on a hardwood floor versus their living room carpet, or in like a gym setting, get off of the yoga mat, stand on the actual group X studio floor, the hard floor versus a yoga mat, right? Because one is just giving you more feedback. If you're looking at shoes, look at shoes that have less cushion because there's more sensory stimulation coming in. This is, of course, in an ideal world, and then there's exceptions to everything. Obviously, the Naboso products that use texture, there's vibration platforms. So there's different ways that we can try to access this. Then you can also think of the foot as this very mobile, twisting, spiraling, splaying, and spreading structure that we need to be able to access all of that movement and that stimulation, because there's thousands of nerves in your foot also, not just in the skin, but in the foot. And when we move our digits and splay them and spread them and activate them, that's also how you're accessing this stabilization, sensory connection to our body, our posture, to our movements. So yes, we need to wake up those nerves. Yes, we need to move, twist, splay, and spread the foot. Yes, we need to get into our digits. The way that we stabilize is actually through our toes. I often say that the power and the strength of the human foot is in our toes, in our digits. And a lot of people forget that. So that's where I like to start this conversation and get people to be a little bit curious about what that feels like. And then naturally, I don't like to force anyone into something, but I like them to tease it, try a few things, listen to the body and assess, and then make their decision based off of how they feel. And almost everyone feels better when they start doing this, and they naturally want to gravitate towards that more connected, freely moving, sensorially rich environment.
Yeah, once you start to feel it, then you realize, oh, I'm like waking something new up in my body. Like I even from a postural perspective, just having clients realize like that they're hanging out in their heels to the point where like I literally see people lifting their toes off the ground. And I'm like, oh, no, put those toes back down. Are you ready to elevate your health? Here at Core Athletica, we've crafted our high quality supplements, including our collagen boost, omega-3s, multi-plus, and more with your health in mind. Whether you're looking to support joint health, enhance skin elasticity, or give your body the essential nutrients it craves, these top quality supplements are here to help you feel your best from the inside out. True health starts from within, so give your body the extra boost. Start today and make every day a step toward a stronger, healthier you. Use code podcast10 to save 10% on all of our supplements on my website at ericazeal.com/shop to grab your collagen boosts and more. Again, that's podcast10 to save 10% over on my website at ericazeal.com/shop. So question for you, because I actually have had clients do more like, I feel like, especially in the beginning, like trying to get there. Now that I have your products, that's very helpful. I've just seen amazing results with that and clients love them. But having clients like have something on their toes to like be able to like grab and start to like feel. So that would be my only question with like, I know you say like a hard surface, but for someone who maybe is more sensitive, like starting them out on like a yoga mat, if they are on a hard surface, do you find that to be helpful just from a learning perspective, even if if the goal is to get more to a hard surface? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. So you can, obviously there's recommended and ideal, and then there is the reality of every individual. Some people have what's called fat pad atrophy. So they lose the fat in the ball of the foot and in their heel. And it can actually be quite painful to be barefoot on a hard surface. And it's kind of like standing on your knuckles is what it would feel like. So I totally get it. I appreciate it and will honor in a sense that that's what they're experiencing. So how do we meet in the middle? I would, a little bit biased, try to go on a Naboso mat versus just a inert yoga mat, meaning like smooth, it's not giving any feedback, where our mind body mat has the texture and then it's softer. So we're kind of dialing in that middle to allow them to do that. Something else that I'll have people do is, if it is quite difficult or there's a little bit of resistance, is I'll have them release their feet with the kneel ball, then put their shoes back on. And at least just say, do you feel how your feet feel different in your shoes now that we woke up all those nerves? Okay. Can we be a little bit curious about what that connection may feel like if we wake up your feet and then go into more of like a minimal shoe, or if we spend just 5 minutes barefoot after we release your feet? How does that affect? So we kind of allow, again, the individual to guide that direction towards being as minimal as possible based off of their comfort level and then their unique foot type. Because again, some people may have fallen arches, drop metatarsals, fat pad atrophy, and we just have to kind of work around their reality.
Yeah. Do you find people with fallen arches that's working with your Naboso technology and bringing more awareness to those feet can actually get them to raise their arch back up a little bit?
So some will, that opens into a very difficult conversation.
Sorry.
No.
You don't have to go there if you don't want to.
No, related to how many different types of quote unquote flat feet there are. And this is something that I very much stand behind. So I'm glad you went in that direction, is that there's not just one type of flat foot where when you don't have an arch, that means your feet are weak. And that's the association of what you can make. There's a lot of complexity. Some flat feet or fallen arches are flexible, where some are rigid. Some are fallen because they have ligament laxity and a breakdown in the connective tissue that actually could be on that midlife hormone change side. So that is an important distinction. And then some truly do have muscle weakness that has led to the flexible fallen arch. So there's differences in that. Now, why I say that is what I tell people is we are strengthening your foot, strengthening your foot muscles or your quote unquote arch muscles, if you want, for the purpose of getting your feet and your core to connect, for your system to stabilize more efficiently in gravity and during dynamic movement. That's our goal. Okay. That is going to be your sensation. How do you feel when you stand in gravity and move in gravity? Now that we're strengthening your feet and your arch muscles and this connection, that's what we're going after. Not what is the actual mechanical or postural shift, like an obvious shift in your, one of the bones is called a navicular, in your navicular position, because that might not be achievable, yet you still feel this complete difference in how you stand and how you move, and you actually feel more fluid and effortless, but your foot is still flat, right? So that's where I try to not get people so wrapped up on where this arch is, because then there's a lot of frustration and then this pressure to have this huge shift. And the foot is very complex and under very unique load. And it's structurally or biomechanically different than any other part of the body. And just the torque and the way that it stabilizes, I can't make an analogy to like the spine or even the pelvis because it's just structured so different. So just for the listeners, make it more of a fascial. How do you feel? Do you feel lighter? Do you feel less pressure? That's my focus with patients.
Yeah, I love that. And that's really important. It's the whole idea of like, you can even look at a spine and say, well, someone has a crooked spine, they look like they should be in pain, but they're not. Someone else has a lot of pain and they don't look like they should have pain. So it's like, there is like the physical that we can try to work towards. But again, everyone's body is different, because now we're talking what's going on in the nervous system, what's going on in their fascial system, because the fascia wraps around all of our nerves. Just to remind all of my listeners should know that, but I like to remind them. So I want to talk about this because I love getting in more, reminding ladies about fascia, how it's intertwines everything in our body. So we have to talk about the specific connection of the feet to the pelvic floor function. I like that you also mentioned the diaphragm, because the pelvic floor, again, ladies, does not function it functions a little bit on its own, just to a small degree, but it's really this integration, which is why when we get women that come our direction, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm getting such good results with what you're teaching. It's like, yes, because I'm integrating the whole body together with the movement, with the breath, with the feet, with the pelvis, right? So can you talk about all of that? Feel free to incorporate too, right, your nabosos of how like waking up the feet, the nervous system with the feet, it can help all of that. I'm really excited about this, by the way. So side note, you guys, I did a video using Dr. Emily's technology. So I'll make sure that's in the links so you guys can find that. Teaching you guys how to use that a little bit just to help wake up, help to find that pelvic floor connection. You know, anything we can do that can help the pelvic floor health, I think is so important. So, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is this fascial connection between our feet, pelvic floor, diaphragm. It actually goes all the way up the neck to our tongue. That fascial line happens to be called the deep front fascial line. It's my favorite fascial line. And where it runs is from the bottom tips of the toes through the bottom of the foot, the lower leg, into our inner thigh, so the adductors, into the deep hip, into the pelvic floor fascia. That connection is actually posterior pelvic floor. So when I look at the pelvic floor, I'm very much into posterior pelvic floor connection, into the diaphragm, and then it continues from the diaphragm up the neck to the tongue. But we also know coming off of our diaphragm is our psoas, and then our psoas goes back into the pelvic floor, and it also radiates out into your deep hip joint. So we have this spider web or this continuity of fascial stabilization. And why I love fascial stabilization is that there are over 100 million nerves in your fascia. So your fascia is very sensory seeking. It wants information. And one of the easiest ways to stimulate your fascia or your brain, because this is an extension of your brain, is through movement. And I actually believe that we were designed to move. So if whatever it is that you're dealing with, like healing, stabilization, trauma, emotion, just everything has to really be based around movement, or movement has to be a component of it. So this deep front line, or this fascial connection between the feet, pelvis, diaphragm, all the way to the tongue, is really based off of gravity stimulation. So really feeling this gravitational stimulus when we stand and when we move. And we know that gravity is a downward pressure. So our connection to our feet, core, diaphragm, tongue has to be this elevation. So we're actually lifting into gravity, and that's an important association with what I'm going to share. So the way that we activate our foot, core, diaphragm stabilization is the action in the foot would be to push the tips of the toes down into the ground, so they would anchor. I teach this in several ways. One of them, the exercise, is called short foot. Short foot is kind of like a doming of the foot, but it's really the activation of the tips of the toes into the ground like an anchor, or kind of like a gecko, like how a gecko's like stabilizing. So you're not really curling the toes. It's not like a towel crunch. We're not gripping like our hands grip and grab something. That's not how the foot works. The foot lengthens, extends, and then anchors to the tips of the toes. That action lifts our arch. And it just has to do with the way that the muscles associate with our toes pushing down into the ground. So the arch will lift. We would want to coordinate that with our diaphragm. So I use a breath cue as the driver to this integration or the stabilization. When we exhale our breath, our diaphragm will lift. And then I try to coordinate that lift of the diaphragm with a lift of the pelvic floor. And the way that you can get the lift of the diaphragm with the lift of the pelvic floor to coordinate through breath is to extend your exhalation. So I love end range expiration, where you lengthen your exhale to 8 seconds or 10 seconds, and then you start to feel how the more that you exhale, you have to access your deep pelvis in order to keep exhaling and extending that exhalation. So as an example would be inhaling into the belly, relaxing everything, and then starting to exhale. And as you start to extend that exhale, you would start to connect the tips of the toes down into the ground. You would keep exhaling. You're exhaling for 8 to 10 seconds. The further that you get into the 8 to 10 seconds, you are still pushing the toes down. You are still exhaling, but now you get to feel the lift of the pelvic floor. Once you get to the 8 or 10 seconds, then you would relax everything and then inhale into the belly. So it becomes this sinusoidal inhalation, exhalation. I use the exhalation as the driver to the inhalation. So I actually don't want people to think about inhaling. It's just a reflex to the exhalation, if that makes sense. So that's the first way that I start to teach people to find this rhythm of coordination and stacking. The other way is that you can use the tongue as the driver to that stabilization. So this time, instead of focusing on extending the exhale, this is a little bit easier when someone understands the pelvic floor, that I would have them push the tips of their toes down. And when they do that, they would lift the levator ani and then bring their tongue to their palate. So when the tongue goes up and the levator ani goes up and the toes go down, that's another way to stack this system. And there's different domes in our system, from our arch to our pelvic floor to our diaphragm to our palate. And you're essentially trying to lift them in unison, or you're trying to stack them. There's kind of different ways you could look at it.
Yes.
That's the initial foot to core. And then eventually I teach people how to radiate it out to their hands because I do a lot with athletics. So it's trying to teach an athlete that's your center soft tissue skeleton of stabilization. And then if you think of it very similar with our fingers, you can further access that stabilization and that power into the hands, thinking like racket sports and things like that. But it really comes from that foot to core diaphragm stabilization.
Yeah, because you could say, I do a lot of stuff teaching clients like reach those arms out and reach from the pinky, and you're going to stimulate deep into
Yes.
that diaphragm. It's so fun. When I teach that to clients, like, I'm like, okay, reach through your pointer finger. What do you feel? And then reach through your pinky. And then they're like, oh my gosh, it's so different. I'm like, yes, it's these tiny little things. Like sometimes you just got to get people moving, right? But then as you're like ready for this next layer, and it's so funny too that I always am like, it's so many things you said, I'm like, want to pull into, but with movement, right? Movement is so important in so many aspects. And it's so funny to me, time and time again, I will get clients or students that'll be like, oh my gosh, like I've been doing this for fill in the blank, couple weeks, couple months, sometimes it can be a couple years. And they're like, I felt something so new today in
Yeah.
my pelvic floor, in my deep core. Like I've been hearing you say these same things. And some of this stuff, you guys, just takes time. And so with what Dr. Emily's saying, she's teaching the breath exactly the way I do, which I love to hear that because time and time again, like 99% of people I work with, when they first find me online or in the studio, they're like, the breath is so hard for them. The breath is so hard, but the breath is key. And the more that you can just embrace the breath, not fight the breath, not force the breath back to what we talked about with like that hypertonic, too tight. When I hear ladies breathing, like they're trying to like force the breath out, I'm like, okay, let's pull that back a little bit.
Yeah.
We have to be gentler with our breath too, you guys. So just a little reminder on that. This is all very gentle. It's all like, I don't know. I always think about like when you say it's like this, we have to be very fluid with our body, and we are so ingrained to be so rough and tough and like we have to feel the burn to feel it. And in the beginning of doing this, you guys, you probably are not going to feel much of anything. If you have something to add to that, but I like to preface that because I think our brain is always trying to search for like, what does it feel like? What does it feel like? And I get that question all the time, as I'm sure you do too. And people are like, oh, I don't feel that. I'm like, that's okay. Like, you have to start with practicing the elements of what your brain is ready for, what your nervous system is ready for. And then we can slowly, in time and practice, because part of it is we have to get ourselves out of those patterns of really forceful breathing, really trying to activate the pelvic floor, and which is overactivation of the pelvic floor.
Yeah.
And this is where I like the technology that you have created, because when I first stood on it, I was like, ooh, and I'm very connected. I've been doing this for a long, long, long time, right? So like I am going to be someone who is very connected with my body. Not everybody may feel it exactly the same as me initially, but right away it was like, ooh, I felt this nice little like almost like tingly sensation of like waking up my nervous system, my fascial system, like in a really nice way, not like overstimulating my nervous system. It was like almost the opposite, but it felt like really good. I don't know how to, it's kind of a weird way to explain it. And to me, the other thing I've also noticed is when we can wake up the feet, and Dr. Emily, I was telling you this before we recorded, but I want to share this with people listening because I've worked with enough people that have had brain stuff, whether it's concussions from health things, Lyme, you name it. I had mold toxicity, all that stuff. So I'm always working on messing with my brain to like challenge it in new ways, right? And so, I have different clients that have had different brain things going on. And when I've brought I don't know if we use the blue domes or if we use I also have the boards too, the yellow boards, which I really like as well. Good balance work on those. I can't remember right now which one of those I used with one of my clients that really have had a hard time with her left side, or left glute hamstring in particular. So I just brought this back. She was the first person that I was like so excited to use this with, because I was like, I think this is going to be the piece, because I've been trying to stimulate her nervous system in like without overstimulating it. This is the piece when we start having dysfunctional stuff, especially dealing with the brain and the nervous system. We have to stimulate it in a good way without overstimulating.
Yeah.
Right? There's that fine balance. And so I had her do just some basic foot stuff, waking up her feet. Then we kind of got into her exercises we've been doing that have been working, but not to the degree that I want them. And it was like a light bulb moment for her. It was the first time after that session that she actually felt her glutes the next day, like in a good way, not super sore, but like she could feel that she worked the tissue. And I was like, this is phenomenal. And so I've been playing around with it more and more with my clients that have had concussions and things like that. And again, I won't do more than one thing with the Naboso Dome or the platform. I pick one of them and have them do it. It just seems like just the right amount to stimulate the brain, which is I mean, it fascinates me because I geek out on all this. I'm like, oh, what new things can I learn? How can I help manipulate to make things even better for our clients? And like, how can we get results? Because everyone else like, how fast is it going to take me to get X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, I can't tell you that because everyone has so many different things going on. But if we can find these little nuggets that can help us help to wake up our nervous system, help to wake up our brain, help to create new neural pathways, help us to get into our fascial system, wake up that pelvic floor. Because again, to the degree that women think they work their pelvic floor, they're just too tight. They don't really know how to feel their pelvic floor. And I think this is fascinating stuff that we're talking about today that can be a piece that could help get someone over that initial hump or feel it a little bit sooner. If you're ready to say goodbye to aches and pains, incontinence, improved diastasis recti, then join me inside my core rehab program so you too can experience the life-changing results thousands of others have had and get back to living the active life you love pain-free. Not only do you get access to learn my exact techniques that have been changing lives every single day for many years, you also get access to either me and or Coach Jen during one of our monthly live group coaching calls. Head on over to corerehabprogram.com to learn more. Again, that's corerehabprogram.com.
Yeah, I think that so because our feet are fascially, or not just fascially, but sensorially, fascially, there's actually muscle synergies between our feet and our pelvic floor, and then there's mechanical, that anything that allows you to feel your feet can then translate higher up. So we do hear, or I hear a lot of people saying, as soon as I stepped on the neural ball or something like that, that they felt like a release all the way to the top of their head. And so that's not unusual to hear that. And that's because of obviously how connected everything is on that. So I like to use a stimulation with the Naboso products as kind of a background noise, because ultimately everything that we're talking about between the foot and the core and stabilization and posture and movement, etc., is in the background of our nervous system or our brain. It's not here in the front because that's where executive decision is, and more the literal cognition of how we navigate our day is in the forefront. So everything that we're talking about has to be in the background, which means there's a lot of repetition that has to happen. Think of it like muscle memory, if you want to think of it like that, right? Is it has to be so automated in the nervous system, but we want to automate proper, high quality, efficient, and fascial-based movement patterns in the background. So Naboso is a way to help bring that into the background because it's a neurostimulus, similar to vibration. Vibration is another really great way to bring it into the background. So if the listeners are not familiar with Naboso or they haven't seen it, I'm sure that maybe they have because you talk about it, but all of our products use texture or really 2-point discrimination. So I have half of our neural ball, and there's these tiny little pyramids across it, and they're itty bitty pyramids, are 1.5 to 2 millimeters tall. So they're small, but the little pyramids are a very specific distance from the other pyramids in a way that it's stimulating what's called 2-point discrimination. And that's a pattern or a stimulus that our feet and our hands recognizes. And then once there's a pattern or a stimulus that your brain and nervous system recognizes, when you introduce it to the body, the brain is kind of like, oh, I know that. Vibration, which again, I love talking about as well, is another one of those stimulus that the brain is like, oh, I like vibration at a 30 hertz frequency, as an example. And then when you bring that in, the nervous system is like, okay, I'm home or I'm safe. I get it. So that's texture or 2-point discrimination. Naboso is essentially doing that same thing. And I developed Naboso, we launched 5 years ago, but for several years before I launched it and started doing the product development, I was continuously reading about texture as a stimulus to the nervous system, not really knowing at that time that texture was 2-point discrimination. That took kind of the depth of really analyzing why is this having an effect on the nervous system. But I would read dozens of research articles talking about movement disorders or people with an injury to the nervous system or a deficit in the nervous system, like neuropathy, of what happened when you brought in a stimulus that the brain recognizes. Then people were saying, I feel my feet. I haven't felt my feet in 10 years. I can now. So then you see this powerful effect, or similar to stories of what you were saying that that woman was then able to feel and connect into her left side. So that's just a little bit on why I always start with, what are we standing on? Get your shoes off, get your
Yeah.
socks off,
No
right?
shoes.
So we have to be intentional to every aspect. And when I look at someone doing movement, I am just as excited about the feet as I am with the hands. So when someone is doing something, if their hand is just like passive, nothing is in the hand, they're not touching another finger, there's no stimulus to the fingertips, or there's no energy, right? Like, I'm like, oh my God, like it is a missed opportunity to access the brain. And I mean, there has to be intent to literally every aspect of what you're doing, similar to the intent behind the breath. Even if the breath is relaxed of what you're saying, it's just like, where are you inhaling? Where are you exhaling? That has an effect on the movement and the exercise and the stabilization, right? And that's the layer of movement that takes a little bit to get to. And I know you were explaining this earlier about some saying, like, I didn't know that, like radiating through the pinky versus the pointer finger is like, oh my gosh, like that, where someone might be saying, like, I've never felt that before. How come no one ever taught me that before? Is movement is like this continuous journey and exploration. That's why I absolutely love movement. And I wanted to dedicate my career to it because it's just fascinating. Is we get to that layer of the onion, in a sense, when we are ready, that it might have actually been introduced to us or shared at a point in our movement journey that we just weren't ready to get that. One of the best analogies is I'm learning ballroom now, and I was a gymnast. So I like to move fascially, but in a block. So I need to be able to control my body very stiff and as a unit, because that's how gymnasts create power and control the momentum during flying in the air, right? Ballroom is very different. One, you're not on in the air so much, you're on the ground, but you are really moving. And I've been doing it for like the last 6 months. But last night I had a lesson, and there was something that was then retaught to me that I had done in the beginning. And I was like it just like clicked. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was moving completely different to how I am now, even though you taught me that same thing. And my coach is just like, it's layers and you have to be ready to hear it. And I actually am learning so much about ballroom as far as how people learn about the subtlety of movement. And it is so So foot fascial pelvis, like I'm actually very excited to see how it's going my career of how I'm going to use ballroom in how I teach and understand movement because of the layers and layers and layers of the subtlety of movement of something like ballroom. It's not just steps. It's actually a dance between your feet and your pelvis when you do ballroom in a very rhythmic fascial way. So for the listeners there's many, many layers that just stay with it, and something might sound or feel different several months from now, even though you were first introduced to it prior.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many ladies listening, I know they're shaking their head right now because we had this conversation in my core rehab program. I mean, so many times, so many times. It's amazing. So, Dr. Emily, I know you have a book coming out soon. So, can you share a little bit about that and where people can learn more about your Naboso products? We'll also put links below you guys and everything. And again, I've got that workout where I show you guys some stuff to do with the Blue Dome because I love it so much, as do my clients. So,
Love it. So yes, I have a second book coming out. If the listeners want to read my first book, it is a quick, easy read. It is called Barefoot Strong, Unlocking the Secrets to Movement Longevity. And it's really looking at the foot function from a sensory perspective. What's your foot type? How do we start to access the foot, the fascial lines, all of that very foot centric. It's available on Amazon and on the Naboso website. And then my next book, which is coming out this holiday, is called Sensory Sapiens. And that is how sensory-based movement is really this aspect of longevity. And I love movement longevity. I love that phrase. I want people to be able to move well when they're 100. But now, really, where I take that word movement longevity is that movement is actually a critical part of how you live to be 100. And there's so many books that are out right now. All the longevity space is just booming as far as content, podcast, products, education, but the whole gamut, right? Everyone just wants to live well and live for a long period. The part that I feel is not emphasized as much is the quality of our movement. We know we need to move. We know we need to lift weights. We need to recover. We need to, get our heart rate up. We understand that, right? But it's actually the quality and the connection of that movement. And that's what I'm trying to drive home is that how do we connect to ourselves? And what is this sensory story really about? Where does it start? Really, I believe that the whole shaping of everything that we do is based off a perception of self. Like a baby learning to lift their head and then sit up and then start to creep and pull up and walk. That's one of the most influential movement milestones of what we're looking at a newborn baby until they're to this walking phase is we're following their self-perception and the relationship and gravity. That's essentially what that's demonstrating. And then how do we really continue that? And it's a lot of what we discussed, but that is my message that I just want people to think more on that is how do we feel and connect with ourselves?
well, Dr. Emily, you're speaking my language. I love it. I love the work that you're doing. So thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in. As always, please share today's episode with your friends and family who you feel could benefit. And I will put all the links to everything that we talked about below in the show notes. And as always, you can reach out to me on Instagram at Erica Zeal. Dr. Emily, we didn't say your Instagram. What's your social media where they can find you?
Yes. So I'm sorry, I answer your questions and I don't answer them
That's
fully.
okay.
So my Instagram is the functional foot doc is mine. I put a lot of content in education so people can continuously learn about these topics. And then Naboso is Naboso. The website is naboso.com. The Instagram is naboso_technology. I do want to share real quick my podiatry website, which is the same handle as my Instagram. thefunctionalfootdoc.com is my podiatry page.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, Dr. Emily, thank you so much. This has been so great. You guys will be back soon with another episode, and be sure to go check out my core rehab style workout with the Naboso Dome so you guys can learn from that. So it's so amazing. If you don't have one yet, I highly, highly, highly recommend getting yourself one. We sold out of them. I got some to sell at the studio. They were like gone so fast. So they will just keep flying off the shelves, you guys. So Dr. Emily, thank you so much. We'll see you guys back soon.